So in this segment, we're going to be talking about some of the updates to the Grenfell Tower fire and some of the inquiries that are going on. There's quite a bit of video in this from new stuff, but I feel like it's important just to watch these clips just to get an understanding of what's going on so far and what the kind of inquiries have found out from this second bit of the inquiry, which is about talking about the cladding itself. The first bit was about the fire brigade, and they don't deserve really any criticism because they were in a lose-lose situation. There was no way for them to get those people out because of the way the building burnt. So if we watch this first video clip, just listen up for this one.
The Grenfell Fire Inquiry has been told the main supplier of insulation on the refurbishment, Celotex, deliberately cheated to pass a fire safety test in 2014. Former product manager John Roper said he was involved in adding non-flammable magnesium oxide boards into a testing rig to reduce the speed and height of the fire spread, and then removing reference to the boards from marketing material about the insulation. Celotex's current management says it was unaware of issues with the test and the product passed in 2018.
So if we just listen to this is the guy here, right? This is the guy here. So what he did was he made some sort of changes to the boards, the cladding, in order for it to pass the test, and therefore once it passed the test, then it was allowed to be used. And so what this guy and whoever else was involved in this was essentially a cover-up so they could get this material out, this cladding out onto buildings, which was extremely dangerous. And this guy's he's come out as a sort of whistleblower, but after the fact. So I don't know how much he's liable for prosecution or anything like that, or anyone that was involved in the changes to the cladding. Who knows at this point? We'll have to wait for the more details of the inquiry to find that stuff out. But if we go to our next clip, this is a bit longer, but it covers some really important stuff. So I'll try my best to let this play and then pause it in certain places.
To innovate.
Lawyers for the bereaved and survivors said Arconic, the American company who made Grenfell's flammable cladding, knew as far back as 2004 its panels were unsafe.
So instead of going back to the drawing board and come up with some new panels, they tricked the system. That's what we know so far.
This document the results of a fire test on the cladding 13 years before Grenfell. It was stopped after 850 seconds, 14 minutes. The result, it was not usable.
They manipulated the testing regime to obtain high classifications for their products, prioritising sales over safety. Moreover, Arconic were well aware that their product was dangerous, their own word, on high-rise buildings.
So they knew it was dangerous on high-rise buildings. So it should never have been allowed to go onto Grenfell Tower because it's a high-rise building. But because they tricked the regulators or the testing or whoever was in charge of making sure things were safe, because they were tricked, duped, conned into this, they were allowed these panels were allowed to be used on high-rise buildings.
This email is from a senior Arconic executive in 2010, 7 years before Grenfell. He writes, "The shortfall in the cladding's fire performance is something we have to keep very confidential."
So what that means is they knew. They knew absolutely. There's no way of denying that they knew this stuff was dangerous, and therefore they've tricked the regulators and whoever else was duped by this. And so these people are guilty. These people are guilty of potentially manslaughter, or of fraud, or wherever the judges find out. These people are guilty of something, and this isn't a witch hunt. They knew that this thing was dangerous. They knew that.
The person who wrote this email is someone called Claude Verler. It emerged last week that he's one of the 4 Arconic employees who are refusing to give evidence at the inquiry.
Gee, I wonder why. I wonder why he's refusing to give evidence. In America, they can give you a subpoena, so it's like a thing where you have to give a statement. You have to come into court. This country needs, if we have subpoenas, we need them desperately to deal with, guys like him, this Claude guy, whoever his name was.
Celotex is the firm that made Grenfell's insulation. In 2013, 4 years before the fire, it was also questioning whether they should sell their product because in the event of a fire, it would burn. And another insulation product made by Kingspan was so flammable, it caused a fire while it was being tested.
So this thing was so dangerous that when they tried to test its safety, it caused a fire, like a huge one, by the sounds of things.
We had to extinguish the test early because it was endangering setting fire to the laboratory.
That's how dangerous this stuff was. It would have set fire to the lab. It would have caused a big fire if they didn't stop the test right away. And they put the stuff in a high-rise building. This is the insulation. So we can see it's two parts of the refurbishment here. The insulation and the cladding, the panels were not safe. And that's one of the reasons why the building must have lit up in flames. It's because they put two things that are absolutely not safe for buildings.
All three manufacturers deny any wrongdoing and say their products were safe if installed correctly.
So what the question we need to ask ourselves is, A, the products weren't safe. That's not a question, that's a statement. We know the products aren't safe because based on what this video's reporting has said. And we also know that they're trying to blame the installation. So if that's the case, that these things were not safe for high-rise buildings, and they had stated this, or there was some sort of installation problem, that means that it was the people who actually installed the cladding and the insulation that were at fault. But I doubt that's the case. But at the same time, perhaps, and this might be nitpicky, but perhaps the people who had ordered this type of refurbishment, this type of cladding, and this type of insulation, perhaps they're guilty as well. Who knows? They were irresponsible. Who knows? We've got to wait for more details of the inquiry. But here we go to an op-ed piece by Owen Jones. Owen Jones writing that, talking about the fire and things like that. It goes further, of course. The horror of Grenfell Tower was predictable, and it was predicted. For years, residents warned the Kensington and Chelsea Management Association of the fire risk they faced. But this is a society that ignores, marginalises and even demonises working class people, especially those who are disproportionately from a minority ethnic background. These people are absolutely ignored. No, these people are absolutely ignored. They said this stuff isn't safe, and they were told, who cares? As was the case with the population of Grenfell Tower, the voices of Grenfell residents were only heard when they were dead. When the building went up in flames, that's when this organisation, the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Association or organisation, that's when they realised, oh, we goofed. These people are dead in part because of us. If there were white middle class professionals in a luxury block of flats in Kensington, which has Britain's biggest gap between rich and poor, would flammable insulation have been chosen? Would their warnings have been ignored? Would they have been abandoned in the aftermath of such a calamity where we know that a lot of the people, or at least some of the people from Grenfell, they didn't get housed properly, they weren't helped properly. And so the bare minimum we owed them was to give them secure housing and help them, through whatever psychological trauma they went through. But we didn't. Is that because they're poor and from minority backgrounds? Or is it because this country just doesn't care? I'll let you guys debate that one. Last year, a report published by the Fire Brigades Union, who risked their lives to save Grenfell Tower's residents, concluded that a mantra of deregulation affected all areas of policy relevant to the fire at Grenfell Tower. Research and testing of construction materials, risk assessment, inspection, enforcement, the setting of standards, and the systems of decision making. The report's conclusion represents a challenge to the very basis of free market ideology that has governed Britain for approaching 2 generations now in politics. This is politics, and absolutely he's correct, this is politics, because down to deregulation. What is deregulation? It's a political choice. It's a political choice. To have, stringent risk assessment, to have, stringent tests and things like that, it's important. And the more you deregulate, the less that these tests are going to happen. Here's why this matters. In the aftermath of such horror, out come the pundits denouncing politicization of Grenfell Tower fire, as though this was simply a random act of God to be mourned, but not learned from. But the Grenfell Tower disaster is politics, and at its most distilled and violent, how a society has become structured to make the avoidable mass deaths of its citizens possible. Whether justice is won for the dead and the survivors remains to be seen. The powerful have a habit of looking after their own, rebuffing the struggles and ignoring people. Politics in this country is theatre, and often pantomime, kabuki theatre, I would say. Like the West Wing Centre, a Benny Hill soundtrack. But politics shouldn't be about those whose careers have been made or broken, but about human life itself can be regulated below the interests of money. This is politics, and absolutely he's correct. This is political. And, deregulation, a lack of, fire safety in these buildings, these high-rise buildings. And to top it all off, I think MPs had the chance to vote on things like fire sprinklers in high-rise buildings, and they voted no, because some of these MPs own these sorts of buildings, right, have shares in these sorts of buildings, and didn't want to pay. That's how much their lives are worth, nothing. These people's lives are worth nothing to these MPs. because they had the chance to resolve these things, but they didn't. They said, we won't forget, but we've forgotten already. And we go to our final piece to prove that. MPs blast government for inaction as flats remain covered in dangerous cladding. Mouse has just given me a bit of trouble here. Okay, here we go. So Meg Hillier, chair of the Public Accounts Committee, said the government needed to end arguments over responsibility for installing dangerous cladding and get the problem sorted. The committee said in a report published today that it was unacceptable 3 years on from the blaze at Grenfell Tower. Grenfell-style ACM cladding remained on around 300 buildings, around 2/3 of the original total to have found. 300 buildings, around 2/3 of the original total found to have used the material. So there's still buildings with this cladding on, and what that means is that there's potentially more Grenfell Towers going to happen. It called on the government to start vigorous enforcement action against block owners where works have not on track. I think there's a missing word there. Are not on track to complete by the end of 2021, and said it needed to publish more information on the timeline of its current works. It also described a $1 billion fund to replace flammable non-ACM cladding as inadequate, and criticised the government for having no idea how many of the UK's 40,000 care homes were at risk. And so it's not just high-rise buildings; it's other buildings like care homes. And what we can see is the government are very slow to do this. To deal with this, Theresa May and Boris Johnson have not dealt with this. They've not dealt with much properly, have they? Really, but what we can see from this is the government just don't seem to care, and that going to Kate Proctor's point, how is this not a huge story about the tricking of the test, basically the changes made in the test, because no one's talking about it. That's why no one's talking about it. I should have done more videos on Grenfell Tower. I didn't. I'm guilty of it as well, just like most of us are. We said we won't forget, but we've forgotten. We don't talk about this stuff, and that's sad. It's really sad, and we owe it to the victims of Grenfell Tower, the ones who have died and the ones who are still alive, to do better. And so I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.